First of all, I'd like to acknowledge some people here that I'm so honored to have my brother clergy here with us. Father Dennis Chigozi is the pastor over at the Church of the Resurrection, where Mom and Dad attended daily Mass for years. And Father Dennis actually, thanks to Teresa, became, my sister Teresa, became Mom's, she was called him, he's her confessor. So he's heard her confession a couple times. And Father Charlie Cotton, longtime pastor here at St. Elizabeth's Parish, and that's where I went as a child, and Mom was the first organist there at St. Elizabeth's, and my brother Billy and I were some of the first altar boys at St. Elizabeth. And Father Charlie Cotton's been there for our family, and some tough times, different times. He would always be there for those moments that we needed him most, and we are so appreciative of that. Father Jerry is a longtime pastor at Church of the Resurrection, and he sponsored me through the diaconate program and really gave me probably some of the best advice I think I've ever had. It stuck with me the entire journey through. He'd always say, "Joe, don't anticipate, participate." And because, it's so true, because there's joy in that journey. And I have some classmate deacons here and that are with me, and they understand that, because going through the diaconal program, we form a brotherhood, and we pull each other. Deacon Chris Rice, we'd say, we have to pull each other across the finish line. And we were just very supportive. And then Frank Anarino to the left of Father Chigozi, he's the formation director for he just retired as the formation director for the Diocese of Columbus. And wow, man, just so blessed to have him mentor us through and get us to that finish line. In today's gospel, Jesus says, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it produces much fruit. And then John, in our second reading today, so the gospel is from John, and the second letter is from John's letter. And he says that, beloved, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. I would say brothers and sisters, because we love our brothers and sisters. And he says that whoever does not love remains in death. I think what's really cool, when you look at this, actually it's a perfect description of what love is. Love is totally other-centered. Love is sacrifice. It's just what we see with this big cross hanging over my mom's casket. That's the perfect description of love. It is other-centered. Notice that in that reading, John did not say because we loved our brothers and sisters. He said because we love. And that means love is done now in the present tense. And then we have passed from death to life. So love is in the kingdom of heaven is here and now. That's what we do in our present tense. And Mom and Dad, I think, taught us a lot about how to love by the many different examples that they provided for us throughout our lives. They showed us what? They showed us how to forgive, big time. When Dad wrote a letter of forgiveness for my sister, Mary Catherine's death that happened for the person that was responsible for her death, he set an example for us not to harbor hate or to hold grudges, because life is way too short for that. They were always accepting of other people for who they were, and they were accepted them without judging. And they taught us not to ever think of ourselves as better than anyone else. Mom's famous saying, especially in her dying days, she would remind us, accept people for who they are and don't try to change them. She said, but guess what? They touched people, they touched all of us by the love of Christ. And, I think that they actually did change people because they touched so many lives. They had many heartaches in life. Mom had a miscarriage between myself and my oldest sister, Mary, Catherine. And then they had the tragic death of their first child, Mary Catherine, and the tragic death of 2 grandchildren, Harry and Chuck. And that was some times to get through. Dad always led us through the bringing our family together with the rosary. They rose and triumphed over their sorrows, and they chose to embrace their crosses. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it produces much fruit. And through all of life's sufferings, our God, who is always creating something new in whatever happens in our lives, he touched our lives and he brought good out of what could be considered tragedy. He made us stronger. He brought blessings into our lives, and we did forgive, and we don't hold grudges, and it's about love and not hate. Life and death. Mom and Dad chose love, and that means they chose life. Suffering comes into every person's life, though. It does, doesn't it? And we can't avoid it. But sometimes people will say to our family, wow, your family's been through a lot of heartache and suffering. But I think it's actually a gift because we've learned to turn to God in those moments. And by doing that, the will of God, it takes our sufferings and changes us more into his image and likeness. And the church calls that kind of suffering sanctifying grace. Sanctification is really not a lot of fun, but it's important. Chastised a little, they shall be greatly blessed because God tried them and found them worthy of himself. As gold in the furnace, he proved them. It means we have to go under fire. And as sacrificial offerings, he took them to himself. And our sufferings can be turned into our sacrificial offerings. We take whatever sufferings we have and we bring them to the altar of the Lord, especially during the offertory of the Mass, a representation of bringing that to God. Mom might have taught us more about love in her dying days than she did possibly any other time. She fell in October, broke her femur, and had three fractures in her back. One of those fractures was considered severe. She handled her pain with nothing but grace. And then February 3rd came along, and we found her on the floor after, a severe stroke left her completely paralyzed on her left side. And as we cared for her, I can tell you that I witnessed extravagant love from my sisters who chose to die to themselves, as we heard in our gospel. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there also will my servants be. When we choose to follow the Lord, we don't know where he's going to lead us. He just says, will you go where you don't know if I but call your name? Will you leave yourself behind and never be the same? Will you love the you hide? Will you quell the fear inside? Will you kiss the leper clean and do such as this unseen? That is a hymn from the summons that calls each one of us to those times of service. Someone would come into my mom's room and bathe her and feed her and maybe would give her a drink of water. Every single time they were met with two simple words, thank you. Two simple words would change the people she touched by her love. 2 simple words by someone whose faith has always been simple and not complicated. She said to me a few weeks ago, she said, "I've always enjoyed my faith, but I've never made it a problem." I think sometimes we can overcomplicate our faith. It really does just come down to love. Mom had a special devotion to our Blessed Mother and the Holy Family throughout her life. She loved the rosary, and she'd pray it daily. And after my dad died a couple years ago, she would pray that rosary from anywhere from 7 to 10 times a day. That gave her comfort, and as a result, our Blessed Mother gave her much consolation in those final days. She consoled her in her loneliness, and many of you were there for her loneliness. You definitely, lots of neighbors here today that came by and always stopped by to visit with her. And our Blessed Mother never really ever left her side. After her stroke, when sometimes she had a hard time speaking, the one thing that she could always speak was her prayers and the rosary especially. I'll never forget the day of her stroke. And later that night, my sister Teresa gets in from Knoxville, and up at her bedside, Teresa whips out the rosary and starts praying it. And Mom's first words to us was speaking the rosary. Wow, she can speak. She didn't miss a beat. Mom's last spoken words a week ago were Monday, were in prayer. She was very weak in the evening. You could barely hear her. You'd have to get real close to hear her talk. But she prayed the rosary. She prayed prayers. That was what the last words we heard her say. My sister Mary Catherine, she died in 1994. She's the mother of 9 children, and 3 of her children were there on Wednesday night last week. Megan and Ryan and Molly and my sister Teresa were on one side of the bed. We prayed the rosary, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and then we asked Alexa to play John Michael Talbot's Be Not Afraid. Played Be Not Afraid, and told Mom, we're playing Be Not Afraid, Mom, because your sister Nancy just told one of her daughters to tell your mom that, be not afraid, get up here, I'm waiting for you. And we prayed that and started crying a little bit. And then we had John Michael Talbot play Here I Am, Lord, and we sang over her bed. And then a few minutes later, she opened her eyes a little bit and she acknowledged she could see Molly. I said, Mom, doesn't Molly look beautiful? She looks just like Mary Catherine. I said, Megan's here, and she followed her eyes to Megan, and she looked, I said, there's Ryan. And then she looked over at me, and then she closed her eyes. And we were talking for a little bit. My sister Patty steps out of the room for a minute, and she took a pause in her breath. Teresa looked at me, I looked at her, our eyes got big, and we said, oh my gosh, it's going to happen soon. Where's Patty? Texted her real quick. She came into the room. Somebody in the room, I can't remember who it was, said, let's have Alexa play Andre Bocelli's Our Father. And as the Lord's Prayer would go, she took several pauses in her breath. It got to the doxology, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, now and forever. And she breathed her last. My sister Patty looked down and said, don't take another breath. This is beautiful. But it was a gift. She gave us a gift. You know, when Jesus was agonizing in his last hours of his prayer to his Father, we heard him say in the gospel, but it was for this purpose that I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. I think God was trying to tell us something that night in those final moments. We'd appreciate all your prayers, because Mom likes those prayers for the Mass especially. Pray for all the souls in purgatory. And those are so important. She would say, yes, pray for me. Eternal rest grant unto her, O Lord, and let the perpetual light shine upon her.